Welcome to this seventh episode of our online seminar series called Revisiting 10 Key TANTlab Papers. Today's topic is sensing data, and it's about how to do phenomenological studies of data infrastructure. I'm very pleased to see you. You should all know that we are recording these sessions and that you can find them on the YouTube channel of TANTlab later. You can follow or stream these sessions as a series, but they can also be consumed individually. My name is Torben Elgaard Jensen. I'm a professor of science and technology studies, and I'm the leader of the Techno-Anthropology lab. And I'm also one of the three hosts of this seminar series. The two other hosts are Mathieu Jacomy, who is an engineer and a developer of digital tools and an assistant professor in the lab, and Matt Artz, who is in Philadelphia, where he works as an AI product manager. Matt is a great friend of the lab and also a mover and a shaker in the American field of applied anthropology. So why are we doing this seminar series? Why are we revisiting all these somewhat old and some, in the case of today, very recent papers? The term revisiting is key here. We discuss these papers because they all raise interesting issues rather than settle them. The issues are still alive and take new twists and turns all the time, so it's worth taking another look at them. And even today's paper, which is from just earlier this year, raises issues that we can keep debating in all sorts of ways. In the Techno-Anthropology lab for more than a decade, we have been discussing to combine digital and ethnographic and participatory methods. We have some ideas, and today's paper presents one of them, but the jury is definitely still out. We have also been discussing how to follow and engage with the digitalized society that we are inhabiting, and also what stories to tell about the digital Anthropocene. Again, we have ideas, but no final answers. The papers we have selected for this series are inroads into these discussions. And luckily, we don't just have papers, we also have tour guides. So we are very happy that the authors, our tour guides, have agreed to join us. With them, we hope to really bring out interesting issues and also bring them up to date and bring out new perspectives. We begin each of these seminars with an author interview. Matt will interview Mette Abildgaard, the author of today's paper, and Matt will try to tease out how Mette thinks about methods for sensing data and the implications of this approach. After the interview session, we will invite all of you to join in the discussion. Before handing over to Matt and Mette, let me just briefly introduce today's paper. The paper is from 2025, in fact, just a few months old. It was published in Big Data and Society, and the full title is Sensing Data Towards Ethnographic Methods for Data Positionality. In the paper, Mette presents a phenomenological approach to studying data infrastructure. She takes us on a tour to Qaanaaq, the northernmost city of Greenland, where data access is scarce and therefore experienced in a very different way than in large cities. She also describes a somewhat devious pedagogical experiment where she asks students in Techno-Anthropology to solve a task under the condition that they could only use very little data. Quite a breaching experiment for present-day students. In the coming hour, we will have time to unpack all of this and learn a lot more about where a phenomenological approach to studying infrastructure might take us. So again, a warm welcome to everybody, and without further ado, I will hand over to you, Matt, and you, Mette.
Great, thanks, Torben. So to jump right in, well, thanks everybody for joining again. Nice seeing you all. So I will share that when reading the article, it struck me that I have not looked at how much data I use, right, in a very, very long time. So that was actually just an interesting, prompt to go give that a look. It is surprising, and so thank you for the reminder on that. Nevertheless, with that said, many of us, we probably don't always acknowledge some of the invisible infrastructures in our life, and so look forward to digging into that today. But before we kind of get to those aspects of the paper, you mind just sharing a little bit about, the field work, how it came to be, why the field site, just the sort of history of that?
Yeah, certainly, Matt, and hi, everyone. I look forward to talking about this. So I've been working on telecommunication and its infrastructures in Greenland for the past about 5, 6 years. And I came to travel to Qaanaaq after a conversation at the main nationally owned telecommunication company after asking them, what's giving you trouble or what is surprising you about the way that your infrastructures seem to be working. And what they basically told me was that it seems like a lot of things are happening in the areas that have a satellite connections that people aren't talking about, that people aren't corresponding with them about. They seem to accept the fact that things aren't always working. And so they had a hard time figuring out how people were actually experiencing living with these infrastructures, given that they didn't act in the way that they expected a telecommunication customer to respond. So that's really how my interest in trying to understand life with a satellite connection in northern Greenland started for me with a prompt from the company that built these infrastructures and is servicing them.
Great, thanks. And so you open up, there is an autoethnographic account of your own experience. And from there, you take it into the pedagogical exercise and then sort of wrap up with sensing data as a method. We're going to get into the first two quite a bit, but maybe could you also help just sort of foreground, share with us a little bit about how you're thinking of this as a method?
Yeah. So, well, the method, so I tried to write the article a little bit chronologically to also unpack how I arrived at the method that I end up utilizing with the students, right? So basically, I'm trying to get at how to experience data more clearly, how to emotionally, morally uh, interact with the data. And I think that clearly requires us to do something. So for me, that field work and the field notes that I open up, they kind of show how I was confronted with my relationship with data, and I was made aware of the things that I was not aware of, that I'd assumed a pretty smooth and unending supply of data in my everyday life, and it did a lot to me in my work practices and in interviewing to navigate that position that I had. And so what I've been trying to get at in different ways in this paper is ways of getting closer to data, to notice data really, right? To notice the streams of data and how they relate to us and the practices that we have.
Thanks. And to pick it up with the autoethnographic account. So I'd be curious because it is sort of a compelling story. I'd be curious maybe to have you just touch on like, a few of those moments that you hit a bit of friction, like, not having civilization installed or like, quickly burning through. Just, for anybody who might be watching later, just quickly touch on that. But then also, I have a follow-up, particularly around the scenario in which you have that interaction where you talk about potentially using data on the employer's connection, and so I'd like to get there, but just maybe tell us a little bit of the story so everybody gets to hear it.
Yeah. When traveling to Qaanaaq, it was my first time in that part of Greenland. So I in the autoethnographic account, I sort of give the reader the kind of story of my preparations for fieldwork in North Greenland. So buying a Switch gaming device, buying a game for it so that I have entertainment, thinking about to download shows and thinking about downloading reading material that I'll need, having everything with me, and how that preparation kind of falls apart as I travel there, in part because I'm not really comprehending what it is I actually needed to do, or I didn't really know what practices were meaningful in that context. So I buy the game for my Switch gaming device, but crucially, I don't download it. And it's an immaterial difference for me in Copenhagen, but it makes a lot of difference when you're counting every gigabyte as you arrive in Qaanaaq, for instance. So I open up that process also as I reflect on in the paper as a way of opening up the researcher position as someone who's not infallible and coming to observe others, but really I'm entangled in the mess of figuring out data practices under satellite conditions.
Thank you. And so, as you work through that portion of the paper, there is the discussion of some of the norms. Again, there's this sort of active giving data, which is quite interesting, right? Something that we may not think about often, and taken for granted, again, the sort of invisible aspect of, and the affordances we have of unlimited data. And then there is that scenario that I touched on where, you sort of ask the question if they'd ever potentially use some data at their employer, to which there seemed to be a strong reaction, right? And so those are sort of two polar ends of some norms of gifting, right? Viewed quite positively, and then potentially stealing. Reflection on that, on those particular norms in that environment and how they may relate to, to the moral concept that you touch on?
Yeah, I'm quite inspired by the tradition in media studies called domestication studies that has a concept of the moral economy of the household. So it's like these, it's way back into studies of media or in the home, like television, who gets to hold the remote, who gets to do what. So I think in a way it inscribes itself into this tradition of noticing ownership and use practices. And here, so there's always morality at play when we look at media. And again, back to the point about maybe data being unassuming or data being too mundane for us to notice it. This was also an occasion to look at the morality of data, right? Of who gets to do what, and if data has value, as it has in these situations, in a way that it doesn't in other kind of infrastructural contexts, then it can be both stolen and given, right? And I think my point would be that I think data has value in many other contexts where it's maybe not as apparent as it is in these consequences, right? Where you can be accused of stealing if you utilize your employer's Wi-Fi, right? But it also, we could open up it into conversations of, unlimited data and the consequences of what is it that we're stealing if we set up a situation of unlimited data, right? It seems valueless or smooth in a way, but where are we stealing from in that situation, right? So I think it's kind of a bridge to notice the morality of data in a way that can be hard if data just seems to be effortless and everywhere.
Yeah, and I appreciate the paper is very new, right? And you're still spending time reflecting on it and thinking about new directions. And so, I don't know how that gets extended to other contexts, but I guess for me, some of the things that come to mind there for us to maybe think about is, there is, of course, always an ecological aspect to, computational systems, and we get quite used to probably burning through data, right, in an unlimited sense, right? And so maybe there's some kind of extension there. And that's more of, just to say, probably right, that we all should be thinking about this a little bit more than we are. Not necessarily a question, but just, something that strikes me. So after you take us through the ethnographic account, fast forward to the classroom with the metered mindset exercise that you designed. And to Torben's point, that must have been fairly challenging for folks. I can probably appreciate the difficulty of dealing with that little amount of data after being in unlimited context. So, you do a good job of describing some of the frustrations and the worry that comes out. But maybe let's just set the stage. Tell us a little bit about that exercise, why you designed it, what you're trying to get out of it.
Yeah. So, I designed the timing of it was that I went on this field work and was just overwhelmed by the impressions. And you can see from the autoethnographic portion how I'm blaming myself for not fully comprehending my own data practices and how much data, apropos what you just said, Matt, how much do I actually use every day? What is my, how my practices are kind of tied up on an assumption of unlimited data. And so I was thinking about coming back into the classroom, and I wanted to talk about what I've just been doing in the digital anthropology course that we're teaching. So I was thinking about how to translate that experience to the classroom setting. So how to get students to notice data in the way that I had been forced to, more or less, in my fieldwork in Connacht. And so that kind of that led me to think about setting in these artificial boundaries, but also maybe a bit of subterfuge, right, about what we are intending to do together, right? And I think that's always to be taken with great consideration, right? And there's a certain playful tone that I think is also, I hope it comes across on the page, right, with students, that we play around and with setting ourselves in situations that are unfamiliar in order to understand new things. But so I translated that kind of defamiliarization of data that happened to me in fieldwork to an artificial situation where I ask students to create a PowerPoint for me about the history of Aalborg University, the Copenhagen campus, and send it to me using a maximum. And I think I set the 50 kilobyte at one point. I've had different maximum. I've been playing around over the years with what is just realistic, but very, very hard for them to do. And of course, the process itself is, what kind of strategies do you utilize? Do you realize what happens the moment that you have such a limited amount of data to solve that issue? That's really the crux of the exercise, and that's what happens, of course, after in conversation with the students, right? So it is this kind of or ethnomethodological, intervention into how we very usually ask them to solve a problem that I intended for them to notice data in new ways.
And you do describe, again, the worry and some of the other emotions. So it does seem that they have that sort of embodied response that you're really looking for to the scarcity of data in that context. I'd be curious to know, again, appreciating that this is all fairly new, right, for you, relatively new research. Has anything changed aside from the amount of data that you're working with as the cap? Is there any other sort of attributes of it or criteria that you're tweaking?
I think so. For this year, I did the same exercise with the students as I describe it in the paper. I think I've been more clear on the reflection part of it. So I think it's very important to say that this was just this was an experiment. I had no idea how students would respond the first time I did it. And so I've had to build it up slowly in terms of what is a good follow-up question to open up for what it is we actually experienced, because it goes by quite quickly in a teaching moment, right? So really getting the students to notice, even though they lived through it, what was it that happens, right? What kind of negotiations did they have to do? And really paying attention to the fact that for instance, the division of labor is part of the whole point of this, right? So who keeps track of data? Where is ownership and responsibility? Yeah, those kind of negotiations are key. It's not just, it looks like any other kind of student task, but here the task is to notice that. So I think for me, the development has been very much in the follow-up and kind of creating a framework where we get to notice that. And I think what was really helpful for me was that for the paper, I had to do another iteration of this exercise. So I've done it in class, but I recruited some students who then gave informed consent, as I also mentioned in a footnote. And so I was able to listen in to them while they were doing the exercise, because they each went out in groups and then recorded themselves. And I wish for every teacher to have that experience at least once, because hearing students negotiate around what did she mean, what are we supposed to do, when does this end, like that was just incredibly instructive as a teacher to get an insight into what happens in every room, in every conversation when you start them on a task, especially one that is a little bit sneaky, like this one, right? Where they're kind of slowly realizing what it is that they're being set out to do.
Yeah, I could appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm sure that would, even in the assignments I assign, I'm sure that would help improve their clarity a bit.
Yeah.
There's always room for improvement there. So, yeah, appreciate that. Now, did anything you learned about the students impact your thinking about your own experience in the field?
I think so. I mean, the students' experience is very different from my own, right? Because my experience, and that's also where it becomes so ethnographic, was a solitary experience, more or less, right? It was a conversation with a community and an engagement, and then, as always, an ambition of gaining an understanding for the point of view of people living in Connacht. But for the students, it was a group exercise, and I think that opened up a new arena that I didn't quite appreciate, which is negotiations around data usage, right? And kind of the pooling of information that happened there, that I would really wish to be able to repeat myself in the field. Like that would be because a lot happens there in verbalizing the experience of being stressed out about data. And that in the paper, it took me 9 days to realize that there was really something up here, and I needed to notice and keep a log of this. But for them, it happens obviously much more quickly because they sit and talk to one another, right? And there's all these I think there's a lot interesting that happens there in their roles, and also their explicit, speculations, the folk knowledge about what is data intensive and what's not. That is just so interesting to discover, right? Like what we tell ourselves about what we can do to save data and what we can do to not save data was absolutely fascinating, and something that I would be interested in understanding more. That kind of folk theory of when are we resource intensive and when are we not when it comes to data, right?
Yeah, and that was an interesting, framing that you used in the paper. And I guess just building on that real quick, you do note how the students' folk theories of data were often inaccurate.
Mm-hmm.
Did you also see that in the field?
I mean, inaccurate is maybe too far to go. I think in the field, people had very succinct ideas about what they could and couldn't do, right? So, for instance, if you have the light version of the Facebook app, it will require less data to download, right? So there was a lot more experience built into this, where I think what we're seeing with students is a lot of these students are really verbalizing these ideas about what is data intensive for the first time with each other, right? So I think what I saw in the field were much more considered ideas about how to match what you had with what you were doing. And people do this all over every month, right? So there's a lot of exercise or a lot of experience here.
Yeah, wisdom presumably kind of collected over time there, whereas, in the classroom, it's sort of rapidly iterating through a very new experience.
Exactly.
So one last thing on the student topic before we get back to the method. There was the mention in that section about its relationship to HCI, human computer interaction, UX. And so it struck me that there's likely an extension there, an opportunity to think about the training of students to work in those fields.
Yes.
And of course, in telecom, it's sort of very obvious how you could better design to help people understand sort of data scarcity and some of these limitations. But any thoughts there? And again, appreciate the paper's fairly new, but
Yeah. I mean, yes, definitely. I think, that's also what I was trying to get at with positioning this around the concept of data positionality, and really suggesting that is an awareness or a skill that you need to have, right? You need to know what your assumptions about what proper data usage is when you design something, or in my case, right, when you ask questions of people. And so I think there's something here with having an awareness as we build or we make decisions around things, to fully understand the consequences of people living in vastly different infrastructures. And that has real consequences of how they understand how their relationship to the internet is, or how their relationships with platforms are, right? And so I think there's something quite important in having a knowledge about that. There's not a global experience of what data is and what it feels like and what you're supposed to do with it, which may be quite banal, right? But I don't see it. I don't see it addressed as a particular thing that we need to be aware of.
And what if we flip that, especially in the context of the program there, where there's a lot of use of digital methods and computational methods? You know, is there an opportunity there to be thinking about data in terms of the data that you are, you know, helping bring to light using within your research?
Can you say a bit more how you're thinking about the relationship with, for instance, digital methods?
I guess positionality probably in relation to sort of the data you may choose to work with. I don't know what that extension is there, but it seems like maybe there's something to dig in there as well.
Yeah, maybe I'm not really. I mean, one of the issues with fields like digital methods, we're sitting with that right now in the research that Laura and I are in, and Kisa as well in the audience, is that it's hard to do digital methods in contexts such as the Greenlandic, because there's not enough digitized material to create some of the visualizations that are key components of those methods. So I think, I don't know if it answers your question, but there's an assumption there that there's enough for us to really aggregate and get that kind of overview, and that's not really the case for this part of the globe. So there's a need maybe to rethink or to create some kind of middle ground. At least the version of digital methods that we have been, testing out in the context of the Greenlandic, like what's going on social media platforms, for instance, right? It's a question of scale here as much as it is about access.
Great. No, thanks. And that relates to something else I think I wanted to touch on, which is you obviously are talking about cellular data, but clearly nodding to other types of data and where can this go, and whether it's an appreciation for other types of data that we should apply this method to, or even an appreciation what may exist or not exist, right? There's numerous opportunities there. So you gesture to that. What were you maybe thinking of where this would go?
Well, so the literature that I'm most in conversation with is, for instance, Sarah Pink and Jill Redberg, who already kind of are interested in how data takes on personal significance for people, right, in their lives. And so they're looking at it in the context of exercise and exercise apps, right, and the kind of data that we as users of these apps send into them. So there's obviously these kinds of everyday data producer context, right? But I think for me, what I wanted to do was broaden that conversation about data as mundane to a larger infrastructural context, right? And say that whichever larger system we're a part of, there's a personal relationship with data that's not limited to telecommunication or to one particular app, right? So I think there are so many applications for this, which just really requires that kind of lens for the production of personal significance in relation to data, right? So it could really be anything, and I think right now what we see in the scholarship is quite narrow, and I accept that my contribution is also quite narrow, right? It only covers phone data. We could consider. One thing my students are always really interested in is like screen time. So like the kind of morality of screen time, and how much is too much, and who gets to do what, and how do we keep track of that, which I also think is an extension of this kind of morality as I talk about it of data, right? Like we can steal screen time by cheating the parental settings. So that could be another application of thinking about like what's temporality in terms of spending time with data. But many directions we could go.
Thanks. And we should probably open it up pretty soon to group. Maybe one last question. So not everybody takes an autoethnographic approach to work, right? Sometimes people, are less comfortable with that. And so I've asked like sort of various themes on various sort of versions of this to numerous people, because I think one of the things that many of you all in the lab do well is, take a reflexive approach and help share sort of the the troubles that you have along the way. You do a good job of helping younger researchers or younger author, maybe not younger, but earlier stage kind of career, sort of see how some of this work is done. So any just quick reflections on sort of the autoethnographic process, what you learned, from that, what you would suggest to others?
So I think what's been very nice about the autoethnographic, I think it does several things that is helpful, or that was helpful to me at least. I mean, it's a way of noticing your own developing thoughts, right? Because you have a log, you bring in your own reflections, but it's also a way of kind of maybe making transparent how an idea about a new methodology may come about. So how do we go from, because that's something that I think can be really hard, or I remember being hard as an outsider looking in, and say you go somewhere and then you come back with an idea. How does that occur? And I think a process that is autoethnographic and opens up for that in a way, maybe showcases that more clearly, right? Well, it's this instance, right, where I meet a stumbling block or I say something wrong, and I notice there's something up here, right? There's something probably worth pursuing and understanding better. So I think that's how I hope it's helpful. That's why I chose to bring it in. But really, I mean, the autoethnographic component is key, because that's how I started thinking about this, right? It was necessary it wasn't planned for this field work to be autoethnographic, but it ended up being that, because data just kept on becoming a stumbling block for me, to the degree that I needed to understand what was going on, right? So it kind of grew out of necessity in this degree. And I also reflect on in the paper, I think there's something in particular with this field site that makes autoethnography fitting, right? Because there has been long-standing issues with researcher positionality in the Arctic and among indigenous peoples, where that really calls for a careful consideration and maybe an extra layer of transparency around how have you arrived at the kind of knowledge that you're presenting here.
Great, thank you. And I will share that it was helpful, so appreciate that. Thank you, I appreciate all of that. We'll open it up to the floor. Anybody want to jump in? Take it away.
Yeah, I think Anders, were you first? Okay. So yeah, so thanks, Mette. I really enjoyed rereading this paper. I've read it before, and I think one of the things that really fascinated me about this paper is that on the one hand, you're exploring you're exploring what kind of strategies and experiences do people have, and at the same time, you in the very same moment you're articulating something about the infrastructure, something that wasn't thought of before. So it has this sort of dual moment about both being sort of about experiences, but it's also about infrastructure, and in a sense making almost a political point, given that and lots of questions about IT and data tend to sort of try to become invisible in a sense. It's just automatic. It's just in the background or in the cloud, or it's just AI, whatever that might be, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of invisibilities being constructed, and this sort of taps into that, or re-articulates those things. So I think there's something I think you put your finger on something that is really interesting there. The question that I really wanted to ask was that when we read through your paper, there's first autoethnography, then there is staging this as sort of a small group experiment with the students, and my question is, could you imagine taking this, in a sense, scaling this, or using this to in even bigger context? Like, for instance, could you imagine doing this on an organization or on a nation or sort of bigger thing to make sort of other actors, broader sets of actors, sensible to data? I wonder if that would be possible to extend your method or your approach in some kind of way. I mean, I know, for instance, I know you're doing field work with a lot of telecommunication actors in
Yeah.
Britain. I mean, could you imagine doing some kind of intervention that would articulate something about their data use to them? Or is that just beyond what you can control, the way that you can control students and your own life? I know it's an odd question, but you know, I hope you can do something.
Yeah, I think if I was more of a demagogue, right, Torben, like this was now, I would go on tour, right, and be like, embrace your data knowledge, right? Let's all sense data together. There would be like a book on, like, you know, sitting with your data and really. I think I'm probably the wrong type to take this and say, you know, let's go big. This is gonna solve everything. I'm not sure. Like, I'm not sure what it would do. I mean, there's a small part of me that's really enjoyed, you know, subverting our students to data loss for a moment, right? And enjoyed those kind of conversations about what is it that we have relied on, that we discover that was not necessarily helpful for us, like. But I think we can, like, there are other ways. I think I'm too much of a, you know. The data is not the enemy here, right? It's about noticing new things rather than, you know, entering into an enlightened point of being. And I do think that the companies that we work with, they already do in various ways things like this. Like, as Laura and I have learned, they bring collaborators, maybe not necessarily with data, but they will bring collaborators to the infrastructure to make them understand exactly how things are working, so that people don't say, oh, you know, hey, why don't you get a car and just go fix the antenna, but not realizing that the antenna is on top of a mountain, right, 1,000 kilometers away. So I think there's that move is already done. I see our collaborators, you know, grasping for, you know, you need to sense that, you need to be there and see how far does it, like, how long does it take to repair things. So I don't know. I wish I was that kind of person, Torben. Then we would have a great future in our new, you know, sensorial data movement.
Okay, thanks. Hannes?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mette. This is so interesting. Now that I hear you talk about it again, I heard you talk about it before. I was thinking that, is this sensing data or is this sensing metadata? Because in a sense, it's not really, I mean, everything is data, right? But in a sense, it's not like the kind of data that I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about data, then I'm thinking about the actual content of a YouTube video, for example. But what you're doing is the metadata of that content. So that's like the first part of it. The second part is that I was thinking that, like, sensors in general are forming or mediating how we perceive the world. I mean, that is the task of a sensor in the first place. So I would like you to talk maybe a little bit about more about how this sensing data as a form of placemaking, maybe, but try to how to connect it back to not just the offline world, but in this way, perhaps also the online content that is not the metadata part of it. So as I see it, it can placemate both in online space and the offline.
Oh, super good question. Thank you, Anders. Okay, so to your first point, yes. I mean, it's nebulous, right? Everything is data, and so I try to narrow it down to a question of kilobytes and megabytes to also draw a contrast to, you know, all of these conversations that go on about datafication and what do we do with these huge amounts of data, right? To say, really specifically, I thought that circulation had been underrepresented, right? So I wanted to maybe make a more narrow cut, I'm happy to argue that it was metadata. And I will say I've had questions that, you know, people are a little bit disappointed that I don't look into more the content of the data, like, so what is it that's circulating, right? But I was trying to just look pretty narrowly on what is it like when the numbers go up, just very clearly on my phone. What does it do? How do I navigate? And what kind of practices do I do to to steer that or to notice that, right? So that was a choice I made. I don't think I fully understand all the practices or the content that goes into this would be, and I think that goes to your second question, right, of the sensing, like the mediation that this does, right? This relationship that I talk about, right? That also others have discussed, like what does, for lack of a better word, like limited data access, right? What do limitations do to us? And I think it does something quite fundamental, right, in the ways in which we navigate the virtual as a place, right? Jonathan Donner coined that term that I used for the exercise, right, where we kind of we sip and we I mean, the old word would be surfing, right? But there's a kind of freeness in that's not in this, right? It's much more measured, much more controlled, and I think that kind of tells us something. It's not really depicted here, right? Because it's just an initial noticing that this is a thing, that we should pay more attention to the ways in which data accrue different significance in different places and different practices organized around them. But next steps obviously are more of kind of this placemaking exercise you talk about. So what is it that we are then doing with that? What are the consequences of these different forms and shapes of data that we then construct in these places? And I've not done that, I think, in part because I just discovered that was worth noticing, right, when I was out. So I think that would be absolutely interesting to think about this as a question of placemaking next. Yeah.
And Laura, you were next.
Yes, thank you so much. Nice to see you all. Thanks for this paper, Mette. Of course, I share maybe some of the experiences from having been in Greenland recently with you, but also from having grown up in a country that is not as digital as Denmark is. So maybe also to normalize a little bit the exoticism somewhat. But okay, anyway, so I have a lot of questions. Actually, the first thing I wanted to say was that I think it is so genius of this paper to actually make use of student exercises, because we do so many exercises and we think about how to structure our teaching, but we rarely have that actually influence our public or our publications. So thank you for doing that. I think that's really nice. And then what I wanted to say, actually connected to what you were just talking about, like the measuring. I think so maybe you can say a little bit about how the sort of the experience of data about data, like how measuring helps us actually care for data and attend to data and notice data. Because when you have these terms, right, they come from a world where we think in a qualitative, touchy, caring kind of world, right? But you say that we do that through measurements.
Yes.
And I think that's quite exciting, actually. And I think in terms of how we think about statistics, visualizations, data visualizations, they actually help us to care, to notice, to attend to, and so forth. So I'd like you to hear your thoughts on that. And then I have another point. That is that we, when we think about how data is nowadays and digitalization is nowadays discussed in the social sciences and in STS, often it is with a very critical gaze. And what I see you do here is actually propose to us to like celebrate data and sort of come together around data and around visualizations. And I think it's written in such a positive and, encouraging way, that I think it would be interesting to think about, a positive data studies, or embracing, loving data studies. I think that would be so nice, and maybe a way to scale this, because I agree with Torben, that would have also been one of my questions, how to scale it, how to bring it elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. So yes, so I think, I mean, we've all lived through the whole quantified self movement, right? And that kind of reductionist view on what increasing datafication of everyday life does to us. And I think one of my inspirations in media studies is Lee Humphreys, who wrote the book, The Qualified Self, where she kind of notices or tells another kind of story that is, highly personalized, of diaries and the diary shape and form, and then connects it to, smartwatches. So instead of data stripping away significance, she talks about how it adds to an already existing tradition of making sense through data and through noticing things. So I can recommend that, or that's been inspiring for me in the way that I, as you say, have more of a celebration, right? I think it's a way of taking due care, minding data. That's how these measurements play in. It's also a stressor, of course, right? Like these kind of messages that people receive that you're now, over budget, and how can you? But it's a way of being frugal, minding your budget, right? And I think that sort of care for data and attention to data is also part of measuring, right? Where we tell maybe more stories of control or of quantification and taking things places that we don't want. So I think there's a lot of other things happening in there. And then I think you're right about there's several times in this paper where I try and say what it isn't, right? And I think that kind of points us to a lacuna in then what is. Like, what kind of gaze is this on data? I say it's not like the digital divide. Like, don't frame me like that, right? It's not about literacy. It's not about... And so I think you're pointing to maybe a gap in the literature about, like, what is this then, right? I think we have the mundane data movement, right? And Jill Redberg and Pink and others who are noticing, but it's in a very specific way, right? They have a very specific investment in a particular form of practice. And I think there's something larger at play here that I would be interested in unfolding. If it's not about literacy, if it's not about the haves and the have-nots, but it's more about engaging with data practices as they unfold, and also maybe that these practices open up for frugal engagements with, limited planetary resources. I think if there's a positive way of entering into that, I would love to understand that more or explore that. But I think I agree we need a term for it, right? Like, is it data care, data? I don't know, but it's another position, right, than the ones that I spend a lot of time, saying, you may think I'm this, right? You may think that I'm now saying this is about power, right? This is about sovereignty. And I don't think it is, right? That's not the kind of attention that I had. And a way of doing it is to scale it down and to stay on the phenomenological first person level, because that's not typically the arena for that. But I think it's in lieu of a clear, that's what this is lacking, right? Is a programmatic call for the direction that we need to go. And I mean, I'm afraid I don't have it right now, but I think we are, we're touching on it. We're getting there. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. And Arshia?
Yes, thank you. I was thinking about the everyday aspects of your work, Mette, and I mean, you mentioned Sarah Pink earlier, and this, I mean, a lot of the people who work with the everyday are always dealing with this dilemma. When you start writing about the everyday, you sometimes fall into this I don't know, trap of exoticizing things. Everyday practices need to be elevated to a exotic level for us to be able to actually talk about them and write about them and all of that.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking if you could, reflect a little bit on that. Do you think there is some sort of a, defamiliarizing the familiar when you are engaging with this kind of, you call it the, I don't know, the metered mindset, I think.
Yeah.
When that kind of practice is brought in, is that a version of making the everyday, the mundane, too exotic to be able to deal with it? And how is that? I mean, of course, and there is a lot to be learned from that, as you write. But is that something that could then be moved another step forward to then see the everyday data as everyday and still engage with it? But that's sort of what I would like to thoughts on.
Yeah. Okay. I think, that's a very good question. I mean, yes, there's definitely here a move, right? And it's a double exotification in the way that I also go to North Greenland to discover this, right? So there's a trap here of making North Greenland the place where that happens, right? And what I try to do in the paper is to say, no, I mean, this is a universal experience, but I think we need to do something in order, like we need a defamiliarization aid in order to notice data in most situations. I think also if you lived in Qaanaaq permanently, you would also need, because then that would be, it would be given that we do things to manage data, right? So I do think we need tools to notice data with the way that infrastructures around data are set up right now. And as I hear your question, it's very much in the thread with Torben and others for like how can we elongate this, that's like a brief experiment with students, right? How can we make it bigger, right? And I think maybe the answer goes back to the conversation with Laura about formulating also a more clear research agenda for these positive engagements with the digital, right? So there's this, securitization dilemmas, geopolitical pressures. It's a lot of attention towards what we're risking, right? But not so much about what it is that we are, what we're building up, what we are positively gaining in our engagements with data, right? And I think that could be part of that kind of noticing in a more extended way. I don't know. I feel like I'm also just talking at this point, but that was that was more my immediate thought, right? Would be to have maybe a broader agenda around this would be a way of continuing this. Yeah.
Great. And then we have Karina, and then we probably need to wrap up more or less probably after that.
Yeah, thanks, Mette. Great to reconnect with this paper. I think it's just basically a comment to I think there's so many things that actually connect in this conversation, like Torben talked about scaling or elongating or like connecting. And I think in that, like, and I should talk about the mundane as kind of exotic or small, and I would like to kind of turn it upside down, proposing, like you say, Qaanaaq as kind of said exotic and said remote, but actually to think about this space as a forefront for where we're going next. And I think actually scaling maybe more in time, like where we're going. Like, yes, right now we're cranking up everything, but in the near future, we're going to be spending more time on data thrift and also the frugality that you've also pointed to before. So basically, like there are limits, and at one stage we will have to connect to this and deal with it, like in a kind of, I don't know, like green data transition or something. So I don't know if you could maybe ponder on in this. I will also, no, I just wanted to mention also this caring for data. Bella talked about how caring for things that are not so easily cared for. So how actually we can use this approach to think about these better or the more frugal data futures. Is that like too grand, or is there something that we can use this for also in kind of the scaling, going back to Torben's question? What can we learn from this?
I think so. And I think, I mean, also relating to some of Laura's and my work on breakdowns, right? And how we like mundanity through the crisis, right? Through the things that aren't working. I think in many ways, the field side, Greenland is a forefront, right? Of navigating breakdowns and of building frugal data practices, right? And I think there's a way in which that does a lot to turn that on its head. And I think I want to do that. It's always a balance of exotification, right? Of bringing something out as an extreme case, which I don't want to do. But I think there's something in the kind of, the discussion around planetary resources and what it does if we notice data more, right? If we have that more conscious engagement with our data practices, right? How would that shift usage, right? That I think there's something of potential and of interest there that I also tried to kind of point towards or suggest, but it's not like really a clear program, right? And it's also hard to think about what that specifically might entail, right? Is that a new plan for school children to have like data mindfulness in the morning, or like how would we practically do that in time, right? But I think that would be like, that's the very encouraging thing that I think I myself experienced while working with this, right? To have these kind of, an awareness around these practices. And that does something, right? That changes something about what we do. But I think it's a big question. And I think we were right on track, Karina, when we did our work on frugality and infrastructure, right? Because this is a step in that direction, a consideredness.
Like thrifty data futures. There's something about that you actually show us. Like what could that look like? Not just somewhere in one, like for all of us, which is instructive. I think something connected to innovation in some form or shape.
In a different mode of innovation than we've been used to, certainly, right? Because it's not about, again, constructing something new or throwing in resources, right? But rather reconfiguring what we already have. Yes.
All right. So thank you so much, Mette, for presenting this work, and thanks to everybody for participating. I think this was a really wonderful way that this conversation evolved in, and it's almost as if some of the good practices of sensitivity and openness and curiosity that you have in your paper somehow sort of spread over all of us. I think that I got a sense that you're onto something, but we don't know exactly what it is, and we don't want to rush to put specific words on it, but maybe something about caring or frugality or engaging in different kinds of ways, looking for different types of sensors or approaching the everyday. I don't know what, but it's that I think at least I had an experience that there is something really interesting going on here about the positive type of thinking about data and data practices that is really really interesting to bring forth and articulate and to discuss in a forum like this. So thank you, Mette, and thank you everybody for participating in this. And we will we will continue next week, next Wednesday, and with a paper by Astrid Ove Andersen, who is also here today, and it's about pluriversal stories. So to be continued, but thanks for now.